Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Crypto Hipster Podcast. This is your host, Jamil Hassan, the Crypto Hipster, where I bring you founders, co-founders, entrepreneurs, executives, thought leaders, musicians, artists, you name it, in the world of crypto and blockchain. And today I have an amazing guest. This is part two of two, but this man is the co-founder of Rarify. He is Lasha Antadze. Lasha, welcome.
Hi, Jamil. Thanks for having me, and pleasure to share what we have on our side and for the crypto industry and go deep dive into the recent stuff that we did and all the interesting aspects that we can share between us.
Awesome. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it. I spoke with Kitty, and that was an amazing interview, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you. And I'm going to kick things off where the first question is this, is what is your background? And is it a logical background for what you're doing now?
I think everything with my background and most of the people's is logical, or at least that's how brain loves to structure things, right? So it doesn't matter like how diverse the backgrounds are or our experiences, is always leads to certain points logically. My Web3 background actually started quite early, in 2014, and think that like the builders and the team that I'm working with right now, we all started this journey together, and most of the team members were still together, which is a pretty unique and I would say a valuable thing over the years that led us here. So we've done a couple of different companies, we've done successful exits, all within the realms of blockchain and now called Web3. Prior to that, let me just say like two words what Rarify Labs is doing. So we're advancing the protocol called Rarimo. So Rarimo is an interoperability protocol focused on the digital social identities. And I'm going to explain what these social identities are a bit later, but it's about the promise of like the ownership of the identity and the very important aspect of portability. So a user can take their reputation, identity, or social capital from one ecosystem to another and have this pluggable and unpluggable experience all together. And the logical, back to your question, like the logical chain towards the experiences that led us here is that, yeah, it's been nearly 10 years we've been in the blockchain space. But prior to that, I was actually working in partnership with Ukrainian government, some of these European countries on to building the first digital signatures and the civilian registries, and that was closely related to this identity space. So these were like the beginnings and primitives of, from a technical perspective, what could a digital identity mean and how could governments issue that. There were like tons of interesting cases back then that were like, I would say, pioneering the many aspects of the digital identities, such as like Estonian e-residency or the country of Georgia's digital signature NFC chips within the document. So that was quite a brewing process, but I think that we still lacked the maturity from the market perspective and consumer and overall business and companies perspective, how ready they were to digitalize the interactions with the end customers. And of course, we lacked the governments and the kind of huge bureaucracies to implement this type of digital flow or signatures or interactions. And we still lack most of it across the world. But leading to this moment and this our focus with social identities, I think that over time, especially like post-COVID period, emergence of the new technologies such as like zero knowledge proofs, the blockchains and like self-sovereign identities, these are like different pieces and the world alignments that I see now coming together. And I think this could be the moment when it all comes together and we are really going to have this user-centric digital, but a bit more zoomed out social identity and ownership with it. And so that's what we built. And I think it's a pretty exciting times. And I hope this entire chain of teams experiences makes it a lot of sense now.
I have a quick follow-up there. I have written a book on Ukraine. On my conversations I had, one of the people I interviewed was Alex Borniakov, who was the minister of the financial transformation, right? Were you working with him in the financial ministry organization in Ukraine, or was it another area?
It was a different administration. So I worked during the 2014, 15, 16 years. So it was a different administration. They didn't have a Ministry of Digital Transformation, but it was, I would say, like first steps leading towards this branch out and all the kind of innovations that currently Ukraine has implemented, especially like they're the first country that issued fully digital internal passports. So and sometimes it's such an alien stuff. Like if you use that digital identity in, like, I don't know, accessing a club or checking your age for buying some goods and services and alcohol maybe at a store, and you show this digital stuff and everyone's like, what is that? And there's no physical copy of it. So sometimes even the Western world is fairly amazed by the innovations that happened in Ukraine for last couple of years.
Yeah, I'm amazed. So I wrote a book on it. So I want to find out, what Rarify Labs, Rarimo are all about, and what led you to co-found the company, your entrepreneurial journey there.
I think I touched base some of the aspects that leads to founding this company and overall contributing to this decentralized protocol. But one of the interesting beliefs I have is that I love this. I supported that all the buzz that was going on with the NFTs and this kind of new token standards that started a couple of years ago. For me, it was like intrinsic social. So it was used for social signaling. It was used for the reputation build-up. So this were like the building blocks of an identity, and I would say social layer on top of the blockchains. And that's what fascinated me, because I believe that apart from the financial transactions and the fungible tokens that are like intrinsically very financial, right? But on top of it, I think that the social interactions are so diverse from a value formation perspective, from the complexities of the dependencies between the users. This is an amazing, and I would say like it could become like 10 times bigger than what we have within the DeFi and fungible tokens. And having all that background with the bureaucracy in one end, all this technical understanding of innovations, I think like that what drove me into co-founding this company with my previous co-founders and a team that we had experience with. And now I would say I consider ourselves in a way kind of unfair advantage point towards the other teams, because we have gained all this access, knowledge, and experience of even failure at the point in the past that makes us uniquely positioned to upbuild and understand what paths to follow or what experiments to conduct.
You said two key words there. You said complexity and bureaucracy. So,
yeah.
As far as the complexity, what are some of the factors that help shape our Web3 identities, right? Because there's a complex. And then as far as the bureaucracy, what ways is Rarimo helping to build cohesion between Web2, which is all bureaucracy, and Web3 identities?
Yeah. The thing is that, like, actually, this is like part of the beliefs and my personal evolution as well. I always started solution building or architecting the different solutions and trying to find this kind of bridge between the Web 2 and the Web 3 worlds. And it was always a kind of mix of this skeuomorphic approach that I took from early on in 2014, 15. We built like decentralized auction for like state privatization of assets management, like different stuff. So I was always trying to like bring some of the goods of this technology to a real world. But when I say the complexity and bureaucracy, I definitely referred to a challenge, I think, that we need to overcome, and that's what we're focused on. The challenge is that identity today, if you talk to every user, basically there's an image of something enforced to an end customer. So something that is regulatory driven, something that is driven because of like some state or financial organizations conducting. So it's a kind of it's a tool that people are disincentivized to go through. So I think that what we are trying to do, and this is the biggest challenge that we're tackling, is that we're trying to zoom out from this prism and really talk about a bigger thing that we are calling the social identity. So this social identity aspect that we're building and introducing and putting a lot of effort from a knowledge transfer perspective, it is above the kind of KYC regulatory identifiers, and it has the traits and identifiers that are native to the digital existence. So it could be your social graph, it could be your NFT ownership to convert the DAO membership, or it could be like the full representation of your social network friends and interactions in a decentralized realm. So in our opinion, this identity is this kind of myriad of attributes that you're gathering in a digital realm. And considering that now the like emergence of like, I don't know, metaverse, gaming, this ownership idea and concept that was introduced by blockchains. So this myriad of what a person's social identity is a quite vague and like large, and I would say the kind of products that will get upbuilt over time. But that's what I mean on the complexity. So it's quite complex, but on the other hand, this is everything that defines us and our existence, both in physical and digital, or like vice versa, and all together way. And back to your Web 2 to Web 3 thing, I think that, yeah, certain biometrics that we can consider like from a real world, but not intrinsically Web 2. I think this biometric data and how we merge with the blockchains, zero knowledge proofs, how do we support the transparency of the certain verification processes running with these solutions is super important. So that's something as well we're exploring and want to bring transparency to.
Excellent. So in order for all this to work, you need to keep things, I guess, decentralized and safe or secure, right? So there got to be current threats to that, right? To keeping the future of blockchain safe and secure. What do you think some of them are?
Yeah, great question. I'd say that definitely keeping something safe now, and especially in a digital realm, you need to look at the kind of layers and layers of different tech and processes, and identify what are the vulnerabilities or what are the kind of promising technology stacks. On the first level, definitely there are blockchains. So blockchains as a ledgers for governing or keeping like the private keys and the infrastructure, basic infrastructure. To keep it safe as a kind of decentralized ledger, the second world, the decentralization is something that keep it safe. So it's like interconnected. So making a very decentralized, open, transparent, and well incentivized networks is what brings those kind of security and safeness within the blockchain real. Going a pillar up towards the identity aspect of keeping safe of credentials and privacy. So this is a bit of a different challenge that arrives with the social and identity space. And I think like the zero knowledge proofs and the advancement of this technology, which is a very recent one, right? It's an amazing thing. If you are just like flashback now the history of the government and bureaucracies, but in most of the cases, the digital voting has not been able or like legally approved because like the previous technologies implementations where the end result in any or other capacity could have been traced. Now we're at the moment of a technology advancement with the zero knowledge proofs where this dilemma could be solved. And I think that safety from this technology application is something and amazing that will arrive within digital identity real. And lastly, the safety is from the ownership and kind of how does the user manage the credentials, the kind of identifiers, and making sure that it's easy to port, use, and keep safe. And I think like another advancement and standardization that is happening, it's called the self-sovereign identity, which is I would say taking over the identity world. Is another innovation from a technology aspect of perspective that will bring this safety within the realms. And then taking all these three pillars and layers together and making sure that processes are built transparently is how we can keep this entire identity plus blockchain space transparent, secure, private, and what's most important, not to maintain the scalability and user friendliness of those solutions. I would highlight and add that on top.
It's interesting because I used to consider myself like kind of headed toward being a self-sovereign individual. And then I had my money on Celsius and they took my money away. They became bankrupt. I was like, well, no longer self-sovereign, right? You know?
Okay. Got it.
So in this world of social identity, which I wasn't considering, I only thought about the finance part of it, right? You have interoperability, you have other challenges, and you have, on that path to becoming self-sovereign. So first of all, what are some of those challenges? How can interoperability help? And then what is your definition of being a self-sovereign individual?
Really good mix of technical and philosophical questions, but let me answer the second one. So in a way, for me, to being self-sovereign in a real world use case means the optionality, first of all. So for me to have an option to go fully self-custody or go fully private, or like have this selective disclosure of certain things or selective delegation of certain aspects. So I think that this is kind of serves, that's what the concept of self-sovereignty means for me. And I'm not the kind of a person that like mega radical that this is the only way to go with like self ownership, custody, and nothing else, and take everything with you. No, I believe this kind of delegation, collaboration, and the community driven sometimes the aspects of even your own identity and individual things. But on the other hand, when we talk about the interoperability aspect of it, right? I always go back to the example from the past and from my experience, because sometimes people say that, okay, like when we're just getting started to build this self-sovereign identities and identity space, what is why we need interoperability, right? So that's something we will build for the future once you have enough kind of friction points from a user perspective. But that's completely wrongdoing, because we've seen exactly 10, 15 years ago when we had these digital signatures or the identity services built by governments in parallel with banks or like the mobile operators. And this was in a way like they were standardizing the digital realm. But in the end, just to translate what we ended up with the user who has to register and replicate the process from one kind of entity to another, like provide and really scatter the data, which is not quite secure, and it's a dreadful user experience, right? So this is the kind of pitfall and mistake that has been already done 10 years ago. And I think like that's why we need to bring the interoperability with, I have like these three holy grails around the identity. One is the privacy in the form of ZKPs. Another one is ownership in the form of self-sovereign identity. And then we have this interoperability aspect as in the form of what we're building, Rarimo and blockchains and overall this aspect. And I think, yeah, from day one, to reduce the future fragmentation, and what's most notable, to ease the user's experience and give like full portability when you have to like issue one single credential and identifier that you're over 18 and you can like interchangeably use with any dApp, with any chain, with any ecosystem. I think that's the promise that we were given, right? At the beginning of everything. So, and that's what we're contributing to, and that's what we're pushing from day one.
Sounds good to me. You know, one of the important things about the social, identity is humanity, right? And recently, Rarimo partnered with Gitcoin, Unstoppable Domains, and Civic, right, to launch the world's really its first proof of humanity aggregator, right? What is this aggregator, right? How does it work, and why is it important?
I think it was a great proof of concept and use case that we launched, because I'm pretty sure like some of the kind of audience have heard about this proof of humanity, or even like some scandals around the biometrics of like certain companies, etc. But we need to understand that, and why we like this identifier is that it's an ability for a person to prove that their personhood, in the digital realm. And that is, I would say, like a filtering capability from the bots and autonomous agents that are arising with the kind of growth of the AI. And this is already a great problem. So it's a very, very tangible problem that we have experienced over social networks in terms of the misinformation, or we have experienced from like fake news, or like all this kind of the proliferation of this content that is generated by these autonomous agents. And it's super hard to distill what is real, who stands behind this as a real person, or is it just the content that you get flooded and influenced in the end, right? So proof of humanity is this very unique identifier that is purely born out of the realm to counterfeit these bots. And we saw that apart from like understanding that there won't be a single standard, or how do we identify or verify ourselves as humans, and I'm pretty sure this will be I don't know, some based on some biometrics, another one will be based on some social graph, another one could be based on like, I don't know, signatures of a community, and others are proving you being a human. So there will be all these variations of how do we prove our humanhood within the digital realm. But at the end of the day, this aggregator notion was exactly deployed to show that. So all these service providers we aggregated had the different verification processes of your humanhood. But in the end, the result was same. So you as a human were given a chance to have access or get rewarded or participate in this or that campaign. What's unique about it, and I think our approach in collaboration with all these great names, was that we didn't want it to just build out the solution or an infrastructure and talk about it from like philosophical perspective, but we wanted to bring on the market into end use case. So with this collaboration and the aggregator, what we did is we integrated it with the Galaxy, which is a Quest platform generating all these activities around the project. And another one we ran in Decentraland with DCL curations in a library, which was more like a knowledge-based experience. Your avatar would go, like, learn about these digital identities, then would take a quiz that goes through this verification process and receive even this kind of memorable digital swag and hoodie with all the logos that you are not a robot, and participate in the kind of reward campaigns around. I think like both experiences are still live, so people can go and tap into. We had quite a significant interest and people going through like end-to-end verification process and getting this badge of being a human and participating in these campaigns. But yeah, I think it was unique from that exact example. So it was first time the tangible product of why and how the proof of humanhood will be used and could be used in a digital realm. And our plans are to like scale it, like really improve the user experience from the feedback we get and make it a really seamless filter within the digital realm. And I'm pretty sure that proof of humanhood is something that will be universally used for our any interaction going forward, whether it will be social media, whether it will be some kind of groups, some kind of events. So it will be kind of basic first block of your identity, where you always kind of you can issue your proof of humanhood credential just once and then reuse it, right? So there's no limit to it. So but every additional identity aspect, I think it will be an additional attribute to your proof of humanhood. So you might go to a certain, I don't know, metaverse, and you might have to prove your proof of humanhood plus your age, your proof of humanhood plus your, I don't know, location or whatever that could be. So I'm glad that we had this great collaboration across the board, and we managed to get this on market.
I just thought of something, and it might come out of left field here, but you said humanhood, and your aggregator's proof of humanity. I'm thinking, what's the difference between humanity and humanhood? Humanhood's all the technical stuff, right? Humanity includes the spirituality component, right? And you want to improve the user experience so that you can actually have proof. You actually can have humans and spiritual people join in and use the network, right? So how do you bridge that gap between the technical aspect of humanhood and the spiritual social aspect of humanity, and get the users to want to build in their future in the Web3 and bring their spirituality components with them as part of that journey?
I think it's a great question. To be honest, like in this use case, we only focused on the technical aspect of differentiating you from the bot, and that was the flow initially. But but from an infrastructure perspective or going forward with these identities, definitely I believe that the belongings, whether it's your like spirituality, beliefs, or the community wise, it could be interpreted, and it should be interpreted in the digital experience and realms, because if we consider the future where the not only the value exchange, but the beliefs exchange and what we believe in, what we kind of connect with the other people that will be transcended into a digital real metaverse or whatever environments, right? So those tools and spirituality will become an attribute to our identities, and that's something we will use as our social signaling, right? Like we're using today. So there's quite like a use case, I would say, for it.
Awesome. Thank you. I know I seemed out of left field, but I had to have a follow up, and
No, I love that. I love that kind of like taking the conversations to the corners I never thought about.
Awesome. So I do want to take it to a further corner. I want to take it to a corner called North Korea or some other rogue areas. There are other messaging protocols, right? But how can you use your messaging protocol to see a potential reduction in cross-chain or bridge hacks from these rogue areas in the future?
It's a great question. Overall, the industry, as we know, the bridges and this kind of cross-chain messaging services are always the target point of different hackers because of its nature of keeping most of the value or tokens locked up. This is the kind of architectural pitfall. But with the identity, it's a bit of a different story. So with the identity, it's more about the data transfer. And it's even though somebody might intercept the data, they will never be able to steal your identity because that's something that genuinely lives within one blockchain realm. And this is what we've built. It's a communicator from a place or an ecosystem where your identity is getting built, your reputation lives, and just like providing these proofs across the other ecosystems. So it's not about replication. It's not about like destroying your identity on one place and recreating for a certain period in another one, but it's about you owning your identity that is not accessible unless somebody does not steal your private keys or the wallet and etc. But it's about like being interoperable and portable with the ownership that you have here. So it's a bit of a different challenge. But of course, the risks of somebody, I don't know, hacking you personally and based on this identity, then like having access to your funds or managing all that aspects, that's something that will come. And we do realize that identity piece will be intrinsic to every action that you do on chain or in digital realms or even with fungible tokens, and collaborating with the solutions and the builders within this DeFi space and making sure the security and the aspect of how does identity manage like the financial aspect of things is something we're like working, building, and will improve over time. But yeah, like mentioned, a bit architecturally and incentivized, the fungible tokens and bridges are a bit different from what Rarimo is building and what we are trying to push, because it has to do everything about data, proofs, CKPs, self-sovereign identity support, which requires a bit like difference in architecture and product perspective.
I have a follow-up.
Yeah.
You said no one will ever steal your identity. And earlier you mentioned WorldCoin. And there are governments in Africa, in Kenya, Nigeria, and other places around the world who have exactly have that fear that WorldCoin, when they scan people's irises and the biometrics, are exactly going to do that. They're going to steal your identity, right? So how do you have measures in place, or how do you counter those dangers or those fears so that people are comfortable sharing their biometric information with their communities or using platforms to do that?
Let me clarify the first aspect. Your identity can be stolen, that's for sure. And especially if we move into like self-custody, if you move into this kind of more complex aspects of managing your identity, yes, somebody can hack you, take your private keys, take like your wallet, take over your computer. It could happen. And there's like another measures that we will need to think from like the physical access and the digital realm security, how these processes are managed, right? So even if I'm conducting a digital voting, right, so that somebody does not stand with a like pistol to my head and making me to vote for a certain person, right? So this is always a challenge is when you like taking the physical world and digital interactions and making sure and trying to make sure that everything is initiated by the true identity holder, right? So that's a challenge. But from another perspective, like the countries that are like now worried about the practices of the certain companies doing the biometrics. For me, like this type of security or the ability to somebody hack is always like relative. There's no like formula, like universal formula or like universal algorithm that says that this is like the full mode of transparency, privacy, or like anything else. So for me, this entire space of especially like biometrics gathering is relative to something. And just to know, so about WorldCon, right? So when I take this, when I look at that company, it's always relative. Their practice is always relative to the government practices of taking my fingerprints at the airport or taking my shots in the streets through the cameras, right? So it's like, do we have any type of transparency with government managing our biometrics data and how it is shared between the entities? And in most cases, I'm sure from the world that I grew in, it's like Europe, Eastern Europe, especially. And if we go to more like autocratic countries, it's a disaster. So people in some of the countries should be afraid of government taking any type of identifier than human than from a startup that is at least like less incentivized to ruin their business model, whatever it could be. So for me, it's always like this type of contrast. And on the contrary, yeah, there could be like some problems. I'm not a person to really go deep into like criticizing or understanding the implementation of other companies. But what I see as a builder is that at least I have some kind of transparency today from the ability to go through the algorithm to understand how these kind of ZKPs are used. What is the implementation behind this kind of round orb, right? And this, I have this type of access. While with the governments, we have nothing. We need to understand, like we have nothing, just the black boxes, right? And for me, when I get this type of question, I always put this kind of scale of like, who should we trust more? And I'm pretty sure that now, in a way, the entry of private companies and startups and this kind of blockchain world into this space and competition and diversity will bring more transparency and even the improvements from a technology perspective. And I tend to focus on these aspects of improvements and the kind of the future that we're in versus just like governments banning and like maintaining control over the black boxes. So yeah, this is what I believe in.
I agree. Thank you. Yeah, I tend to agree with you. Yeah, that sounds great. That sounds great. Thank you. So I want to thank you very much for your time today. This has been an amazing conversation, and the time flew by. And I have one final question, and it's probably the easiest one I've asked you. It's how can people find out more information about you, about Rarify, about Rarimo, How can they get involved? How can they, become a client or user? How can they do any of that?
Likewise, Jamil, I first mentioned that I really enjoyed the interview and the questions and the kind of all the philosophical, political, and technical aspects we touched over the course. In terms of like finding out more, so people can go to rarimo.com and follow us on Twitter, reach me directly. I'm quite responsive across the different social media. So, and always happy to, I don't know, brainstorm, jam, exchange information, and absorb from different corners of the blockchain and even non-blockchain world. How could we improve things and move things forward?
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Jamin.